Let's now turn our attention to this story. Net zero policies are pushing up inflation and hitting economic growth. That's according to a top Bank of England policymaker. The warning comes at a tough time for the Bank of England and for British households, with inflation running still at 6.7%. That's more than 3 times the bank's 2% target rate. Joining me to discuss this, Ben Pyle, co-founder of Climate Debate UK, and meteorologist and social commentator Jim Dale. Welcome to you both. Ben, sounds like some grim news from the head honchos over there at the Bank of England. Good afternoon.
Yeah, it does sound like, good afternoon. It does sound like that. I'm very pleased that the Bank of England is starting to realise something that many people have been telling them for quite a long time, that these policies are inflationary. And if they really want to run with this, although I still think they want to have their cake and eat it, they need to really investigate what Mark Carney has done. And we've seen the return of Call Me Dave this week, and it was he who ran the greenest government ever. So he claimed, who under his watch appointed Mark Carney to be the governor of the Bank of England. And I've often joked that the Bank of England's statements on climate change might just as well have been written by Greenpeace, and indeed it turned out that a Greenpeace one of their members is in fact a Greenpeace activist, and I think he may have been arrested at a recent event, according to the Daily Mail. So there's been some really rather radical green ideology going on in the Bank of England, and this has led them to make all sorts of policy recommendations, and pretty much allowed the governor was allowed to treat it pretty much as a campaigning organisation, and those policies have really pushed prices up over the years. For example, by discouraging investment in hydrocarbon energy, in oil and gas reserves in Britain in particular, and of course throughout Europe. And it's tried to sort of persuade financial institutions that the future does not lie in these forms of energy production. And so a lot of money over the last sort of decade or so has gone away from these incredibly important and vital industries, and become more and more expensive for them to raise capital.
Okay, Ben.
So the cost of capital.
Let me just get a response from that from Jim. I mean, Jim, it's all very well saying net zero is the way to save the planet, but everybody's skint, starving and unemployed. It's not going to really do very much, is it?
Yeah, good afternoon, Ian. What I would say is, if you go back a couple of years, let's look at where the real inflation came from. Remember the Ukraine war? Yes, it's still going on. But at the very beginning, what moved? It wasn't the green energies that moved in terms of the shock that occurred in the world markets. It was oil and gas. We only had to visit our petrol stations, and still now today the same. So this is a mirage that Ben's putting forward, protecting the fossil fuel industries. You know, let me just say, the author of that speech, by the way, from the Bank of England, Catherine Mann, she puts a very succinct little. I've read the report completely. I don't know whether you guys have, but I've read it completely now, and it's it's complex. And whatever, she goes into a lot of detail. But one thing she does say, and if I can quote this is quoted from her: if governments fail to rise to the challenge to put into place sufficient climate policies to achieve net zero sufficiently swiftly, then transition impacts may not be the main concern for monetary policymakers, but physical impacts will be. And that is also testified by Deloitte.
So she's saying that the physical impacts will be so bad that the inflation stuff won't hardly matter. Is that broadly what you're saying?
We're already seeing that.
Okay,
we're already seeing it.
All right, but Ben, is that? I mean, if the world's going to end, Ben, well, why do we care about 1 or 2% of inflation going up? It doesn't matter. We'll be quivering and shivering somewhere.
Well, that seems very unlikely, even if we saw a multiplication of the extreme weather events that Britain or the world experiences. And I would suggest we don't see very much evidence, for example, of increase in hurricane frequency or intensity, or in the Atlantic, the North Atlantic, and the remnants of storms which end up here. I think insured disaster losses in the UK amount to less than £1 billion a year in a typical, in an average year. I think they may in today's money, maybe about £1.5 billion worth of damages in that year. But if you compare that against the rising cost of energy, for example, we pay 10 billion a year in green energy subsidies, and when the energy prices rose because of during or just after lockdowns, each household paying an extra £1,000 is an extra 28 billion just coming out of households, never mind businesses. So these are the inflationary effects. So for climate change to be a worse problem than the UK's own policies, there would have to be 100 times as many storms, or they would have to have 100 times as much effect.
Is that fair, Jim? I mean, Jim, you're a meteorologist. Do you recognise this?
Yeah, well, let me say about subsidies first of all. Again, masking over the oil and the gas side of things, 7% of government subsidies worldwide went in the direction of oil and gas between 2022 and 2023. So let's get the sums right and not forget what oil and gas are actually being supported in terms of those subsidies going forward.
Have any,
and I'll just give you another little quote for you. Deloitte, the city firm Deloitte, they predict, and this is their prediction from some time ago now, but it's still relevant and shows the impact that's happening with weather. But this is going forward 50 years, and if nothing is done, well, even if something is done, $178 trillion will be the cost of the impacts over the next 50 years, and another $44 trillion if nothing is done. So Ben is advocating and supporting oil and gas forever and a day. For whatever reason, I don't know. His eyes are wide shut as far as climate is concerned, or as meteorology is concerned.
Okay.
And mine.
Jim, let me just get a very quick response on this then from Ben. We've only got about 10 seconds. Ben, respond if you could to Jim's point.
Well, Jim's point is as good as Mystic Meg's. It's just crystal balls. There's no test in reality. And the last few years have shown that these kind of dire predictions, these alarmist predictions, they never come true. But what we can be sure of is that expensive energy is a far worse problem than climate change.
Got it. All right, listen, we will continue, I'm sure, this debate at another time. I'd love to make it longer. Ben Pyle, Jim Dale, thank you, gentlemen, for that.